Next year is the 100th anniversary of the death of Woodrow Wilson. He tried to live longer, but his heartbeats gave out. So I thought it would be of interest to talk about Woodrow Wilson and the war to end all wars and the American involvement in the war of 1914. And I was thinking, not thinking, I think when I dream, but what drew all of Europe together into the Great War, and this is no prediction or concern, that we know, don't we, that Putin has a concern about NATO, and that the Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Poland is, and no one wants this to expand at all. What happened in 1914 is that Europe was all caught up in alliances, and the two major alliances, and I'll just mention this and get back to it if I remember, and one was the Triple Alliance. I remember right now. One was the Triple Alliance already in place, and the Triple Alliance was three nations in the Triple Alliance, and that was Germany. Who was it? Germany, Austria, and Italy. And the Triple Entente, the best way to pronounce that, pinch your nose. Entente? You really sound like you're stuck up. All right, the Triple Entente was France and England, and who else was in there? And Italy in the Triple Entente. So we have these alliance systems in place. Now, I'm not predicting anything. I'm not. It's just that NATO is an alliance system, isn't it? And the Ukraine is not part of NATO. Poland is. And many of these refugees are fleeing to Poland, aren't they? So they need to be careful. Putin, and he knows this, and President Biden knows this as well. So no predictions. I'm just saying that the alliance system in Europe pulled all of Europe into the Great War of 1914. And it's called the Great War, not because wars are great, but because there were so many nations involved. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 26 or 28 nations were sucked into the Great War of 1914. So it is Woodrow Wilson's death day next year, and I thought just to vary things up, we'd go to the 20th century. I know we're in the 21st century. I know that. To go to the 20th century, and I think last month we talked about the Boston Massacre, didn't we? So I like to move things around because the topic, the title, will draw in a larger crowd. I'll bet yesterday there'll be 3 people here, with the poor weather, and I didn't even bring a jacket with me. I got soaked. That's okay. That's why I left the trash out for today, and I'm glad that I did. So let's talk about Woodrow Wilson a little bit. Woodrow Wilson was an intellectual. Woodrow Wilson had been a professor of history at Princeton, that he had moved along to be governor of New Jersey, and he was a Democrat, and nothing wrong with that, and was nominated on the 43rd ballot in 1916, to run against the Republican candidate. And Woodrow Wilson was he wanted to do good things. He wanted to use the power of the presidency to improve the quality of life in the United States. Woodrow Wilson was, if you go back in your history books, was a progressive. And the progressive movement was to improve the quality of life. I can't make eye contact with you. I always want to see who's in front of me. I want to know what's coming at me, especially if they're arrows. You can have those arrows up here, and then lend them to Westwood. All right, they deserve it, for personal reasons. So Wilson was a liberal. He was a progressive to improve the quality of life for all Americans. And Wilson was not a man who wanted war at all. But when war came to Europe in 1914, and now stop me, please, I always say this, stop me if you have a question or an observation. Bless you, child.
Thank you.
You got a third one coming?
What? A third.
Well, we're talking about triple alliance, triple entente. I thought maybe you would give me a little background for the third sneeze. See, I play off people all the time. I played off my sons, 3 of them. Triple alliance, triple entente, 3 sons, and then that was it. I wasn't going to fall into the trap of my father with 8 boys. I wasn't going down that, I know. As soon as I had 3 sons, I said, I'm done. I didn't ask permission. I just did it. I said, I am done. A good decision. So Woodrow Wilson, a progressive, to improve the quality of life, not only for the United States, but for the Western world as well. So when war broke out in 1914, and no one expected this war, by the way. David Lloyd George, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, made the observation, and it was true, that in Europe we slithered into war. And I like that verb, we slithered into war. No one expected it. No one was fully prepared for it. Everyone knew there would be trouble, and that we slithered into war. And that's a good way to remember it, or to think about it. With the assassination of Francis Ferdinand, who was heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that triggered the alliance system. One nation declared war on another, and another, and another, and I don't want to turn it into a who did what to whom. I want to concentrate on Wilson and the American response to the Great War of 1914. And again, to be repetitive, it was called the Great War because so many nations were involved. By the end of the war, as I said again, 26, 28 nations were involved in the war. That's a great war. Even Japan got involved in the war of 1914, 1980. And for them, the payoff was to get the German colonies in the Bismarck Archipelago. When's the last time you heard of that? Never. I mean, the Germans had colonies in the Pacific, and the Japanese wanted them, and they got them, and they fortified them. And in World War II, the American Marines and the American Army had to go after the Japanese, who dug in on some of these islands. So Wilson was a peaceman. Wilson was an avid golfer. His second wife was an avid golfer as well, and what annoyed him all the time is she was a better golfer than him. Now that can be annoying, particularly if you're keeping score. Now, miniature golf is easy. You can cheat. I always cheated. With my sons, I always cheated on that scorecard. That way I win. And they knew that after a while. I'll tell you a little story, a very short story. When we would play checkers together or Monopoly or everything, and the 3 boys were old enough to keep track of what's going on, if one of them had to go to the bathroom, they would say to the others, keep an eye on Dad, because he always moves things around. And when I come back, these pieces are in different places. Keep an eye on Dad. He cheats. And I did. I said, and I did this so you would keep an eye on me, and now would train you to keep an eye on other people, or help you learn to keep an eye on other people. When the war broke out, what Wilson wanted to do is Wilson wanted to be the peacemaker, not the war maker. He wanted to be the peacemaker. So at the very beginning of the war, he offered his position as president and the integrity of the United States to bring about peace between and among the warring powers. They wanted no part of this. I mean, there had been conflict between and among the Russians and the Italians and the French in particular for years, and they wanted to settle this by war. Conferences prove nothing. Conferences just lead to another conference, and we want to settle this by war. This is not Wilson. Wilson, we need to discuss this. We need to adjudicate it, and they wanted no part of it. Wilson Keep your distance. And this is the war that gave us words or terms we still use today. Trench coat, trench mouth. And these are words that we still use today. The no man's land, between the German forces and the French and the British forces. This was a war that Europe had never seen before, with the casualties and poison gas being used. We've heard a little bit about that, haven't we? Poison gas being used, and to eliminate the enemy. And for the very first time, war on civilians. And I'm thinking of the sinking of the Lusitania, the torpedoing of the Lusitania in 1915. The Germans had U-boats, didn't they? The United States had U-boats. And U-boats now prowled the oceans. And when the Lusitania was sunk, this brought war to civilians. And this was a huge, huge story in the American press. Wilson was furious at this. And Wilson, I want to settle this with a peace conference. And neither England or France or Russia or the Germans wanted a peace conference. We want to fight this thing through and settle it by arms. Settle it with tanks, poison gas, and a mass conscription to get this thing done with. And Wilson, this will just generate another war. When you have a war, there's always losers and winners. And the losers are going to want to beat up on the winners. He said, it's a cycle. Go back. Wilson, go back and read your Bible. Wilson's father had been a minister. And Wilson had been brought up between the Bible and the preacher's word. Wilson was a great speaker, and he wrote elegantly, brought up between the Bible and his dad, the preacher. And that's where he learned the power of words and how to use words. So we have from that, and I'll come back to these phrases as well, that this must be the war to end all wars. Remember that? And that's where it came from. Wilson, my dad was a preacher, and that we need to follow, not the golden rule, but we need to follow the advice of the Bible. A war to end all wars, to make the world safe for democracy. The world. Not just the Western world, but the world safe for democracy. This is Wilson. So with the sinking of the Lusitania and the loss of, maybe 20 or 30 American lives, this galvanized, American public opinion, and certainly Wilson. And Wilson made the demand upon Kaiser Wilhelm II, the head of the Second Empire, the Second Reich, that you need to pull your U-boats off the ocean, dock them, and not use them ever again, or you're going to have to deal with me. This is Wilson. You're going to have to deal with me if these U-boats reappear, and to be used without warning. The American newspapers were shouting for war against Germany, shouting for war against Austria. Wilson, wars serve no purpose. But the propaganda, put into this country by the British was excellent. If you have time tonight, here's your homework. Again, did you do your homework assignment? I know you didn't.
The dog ate it.
Pardon me?
The dog ate it.
Yeah. So I know that no one did their homework from the Boston Massacre and understands that Revere's given name was Revor, wasn't it? I'm not going to tell you why. You're going to have to look that up as well. So the newspapers calling for war. The British propaganda, and look at their posters, the British propaganda was outstanding. And the word that they introduced to the American public was the word Hun, H-U-N, Hun. We are not fighting Germans. We are fighting the descendants of Attila the Hun, whose method of warfare was burn, rape, destroy everything. We are fighting Attila the Hun. This is evil, and we need help against this evil. And Wilson is trying to react to this in between his golf game, trying to react to this. And finally, Wilson goes to Congress in 1917 and asks Congress for a declaration of war. And he gets a rousing reception, a declaration of war to make the world safe for democracy. You know, the war to end all wars. And that there will be a peace treaty, a peace between equals. And that there will be no winners and losers, as I said a moment ago. If losers want to beat up on the winners, and we can't have that, the next war will be worse. Look at what we have now. You know, not now, but back then. We have U-boats, we have tanks, we have poison gas, long-range artillery. The next war will be worse. We need to end it now. I sound like Joe Biden. End it now. Don't make that face at me. I know why you did it. I may agree with you. We need to end war now. And I want to be the peacemaker. American troops will be committed to World War I, and they arrive in 1917. They arrive actually in 1918, you know, to help the Allies, to help the British and the French to fight the war and defeat the Huns. And it must have been wonderful when these big, strong men, corn-fed boys from Iowa, came down that gangplank and they marched down. And the words on their lips were, Lafayette, nous voici. Lafayette, we are here. Nous voici, to repay the favor, France, to repay the favor that you did for us during the American Revolution. It must have been wonderful to hear these big, strapping men, with their knapsacks and with shouldering their rifles. Lafayette, nous voici. We are here. America has arrived. We are here. And we've never lost to help you defeat the Hun. Without us, the war will lead to an intolerable situation. It must have been wonderful. Now, to be part of that, I think. And what the British and the French, what they wanted to do, and Blackjack Pershing said, absolutely no. What the British and the French wanted to do is they wanted to take American troops and plug them into holes in the French lines and the British lines to limit their casualties. And Blackjack Pershing, and it was called Blackjack, you've heard that, right? Blackjack, because he commanded black troops in the war against Pancho Villa. They never found him, by the way. Blackjack Pershing. Absolutely not. I am not going to use my men to plug your lines. Britain, French. We want our front, and we will fight on our front as Americans and do the right thing. Harry Truman was part of that. And I mean, Harry Truman, was a commander of a roughneck group of Irishmen. They gave every commander trouble. And Harry Truman said, they won't give me trouble. I'll tell you why. I'm going to bring them in. I'm going to talk to their commanders and to say, you're good boys. You got good boys. They just need to follow orders, that's all. And what are they asking for? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing it this way and not that way? And what's the outcome? All they need to do is have it explained to them, and they'll be excellent soldiers. I'm going to plug them into our lines. I'm going to plug them in here and plug them in there. And Blackjack, we will win our war or help the Allies win their war. Truman was an excellent commander. That's the only thing that he ever was successful at. He failed at everything, except in courting his wife. I think we've talked about that before. And Harry Truman's wife said, I will marry you, Harry, even you come from the wrong side of town, and your father is a failed raiser of mules. If we live in my mother's house, Mrs. Wallace's house. That's a tough thing to ask, isn't it? I'll marry you if you move in with me and my mother. Well, to me, that'd be a big no, a huge no. That's a deal killer. But he accepted it, and he grew to like, I think, Mrs. Wallace, So that said, Blackjack Pershing, into the lines, and the Germans. The Germans were running out of everything, running out of men, running out of bandages, running out of ammunition. At the end of the war, the Germans who were wounded, they were being wrapped up in gauze. There were no bandages. If you want to read a book, you probably read it in the 8th grade. But you read certain books at certain times in your life, and they resonate with you because you've had some experiences. I know you all have read. You know what I'm going to say.
No.
Yes, you do. You're going to remember it. All Quiet on the Western Front. Now, that's a book you read in the 8th grade, or maybe in the nursery. I don't know. But it is, you can read it at any time of your life, and it resonates. All Quiet on the Western Front. Just like you read The Scarlet Letter, to get a whiff of colonial America, that you read The Great Gatsby. Now, you all read The Great Gatsby, I know, in the 9th grade. But in the 9th grade, it doesn't mean anything. But you read it when you're 40 or 50 years old, and unrequited love. It's great. I love this woman. And she didn't love me back. And you want to find out what made Fitzgerald call Gatsby the Great Gatsby. He pursued the dream. The Scarlet Letter. The Jungle. Reading about America during the Progressive Era and the slaughterhouses. So all of these books, some of these books, have a great historical anchor. All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Remarque. Hitler burned every copy of that book he could find because I want to wage war. And he said, and Erich Remarque, if I get hold of him, he's going to a concentration camp because he's a Jew. He's a pacifist Jew. He wasn't. He was a Roman Catholic, or a Catholic anyway. And read that book. That's your homework assignment. You can read it in half an hour, and it describes war in a truly miserable way. Back to Wilson. Any questions yet? Have you read All Quiet on the Western Front? You had to have had it in the 9th grade. You had to have had. It's required reading. It is today as well. Hitler. I'm going to burn all the copies. And I want this guy, Remarque. He's a pacifist. He's a liberal. And only a pacifist and a liberal would write a book like that. None of that was true. He fought in World War I. This is what it's like on the Western Front. This is what it's like in the trenches. My grandfather, or my great-grandfather, I don't remember, fought in World War I on the American side. He wasn't a Hun. And he talked about, at least I've heard about this, trench rats. Trench rats. And when the fighting had stopped and the dead were on the battlefield, the rats would go out on the battlefield and they would feed on the dead. And they got fat, and they became nicknamed trench rats. And they didn't want any part of you, if you were alive in the trenches. They wanted the shelling to stop and go out there and feed on the dead. The trench rats. Now, how about that? You bring home memories. By the way, this is the beginning of having this, PSTD, remembering things from the Great War. The war ends in 1918. All Quiet on the Western Front in November of 1918. And we're going to try to negotiate a settlement here. Wilson wants to go and to help negotiate the settlement. He is sick. He's had a number of seizures, and he has a headache that won't go away. And he's bedridden. And his wife, Edith, Woodrow, I'm sure she never called him Woody, Said, I am Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States, Chancellor of Princeton University, Governor of New Jersey. Nobody calls me Woody. I am Mr. President, and I'm Woodrow Wilson. And my father was a minister, and I know the power of the spoken and the written word. That's where it comes from, to make the world safe for democracy. He was too ambitious. I want to go to France and help negotiate and enter the peace treaty. His wife urges him not to. It may kill you. He says, I'll take my personal physician with me. And he does. It may kill you. I'll never see you again. He said, that's okay. Maybe I don't want to see you either. All right? I made that up. You know, I think they had a good relationship. You know, his first wife died of Bright's disease, and he liked, Woodrow Wilson liked the company of women. You know, a female, a woman's voice being part of the decision making. That's Wilson. And she said, Wood, I don't want you to go. He said, I have to go. I must do this, you know, to bring about a world without war. I'll tell you what I will do. I'll bring my personal physician with me. And there's great film footage of him on the deck of a battleship, you know, with his hair blowing, and his personal physician is there, and they're chatting. And I'll take my own doctor, and don't worry, I will be home. He comes home a very sick man. When Wilson shows up, and he marches in parades, or is carried down in an open car, the people of France in particular, and you could hear the cheering almost across the English Channel. Vive l'Amérique! Vive l'Amérique! Vive la Wilson! You have come to save us from the Hun. You have come to make this the war to end all wars. What David Lloyd George, Great Britain, and George Clemenceau of France wanted revenge. They did not want a peace. We want revenge against the Huns. Look at all the damage that they've done. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? When the German delegates arrived at Versailles in France, the train slowed down to a crawl. You know, they wanted the Germans to be able to look out the window and see all the destruction they'd brought about, leveling cities and the monuments. You know, if you go to France, if you go to England, if you go to Germany, the monuments are all to the dead of World War I with the names on them. They're not to the dead of World War II. It is to remember how most of the male population of a certain town in France have been wiped away by the war. And you look at these, and it's incredible. The male population of entire villages eaten up by the Great War. And you look at that and you say, whoa, that was only the beginning. Another war was coming, but no one knew it. So here was Wilson. Vive l'Amérique! Vive la Wilson! Cheering him, cheering him. They expected him to punish Germany, punish them severely. And he said, if you do that, you're going to have another war. Read your Bible. My father was a minister. That's the lesson from this. We've never seen such carnage. And around the table, British, David Lloyd George, George Clemenceau from France, and Woodrow Wilson. 2 against 1. And when Wilson arrived, he didn't have the juice of being the president. He was the American representative. And he was advised by many, don't go. Not only for your health, just to make an appearance and then get home. Because you're dying. Said, I am going, and I'm going to stay, and I'm going to attend every conference. And I'm going to read every briefing book. I am going to be as well informed as British history, Russian history, Italian history, as any of the delegates there. he got eaten up. He tried. He got eaten up. 2-1, 2-1, 2-1. And what? I don't have it with me. No, I don't have it with me. What he brought with him, I do have my Constitution, though. You know I always carry that, right? You know that. Last time I forgot it, didn't I? There she is, right there. Before Wilson arrived, he sat down with some of his aides, and he put together a document, that he believed would end war forever. And we know it today, we learned it today, or in school, as the 14 points. That these are the 14 points we need to address. And if we can talk about these 14 points and neutralize them as a source of war, we're on our way. And the most important point, the jewel of Wilson's 14 points, the jewel was the League of Nations. Anybody remember that? The League of Nations. That will be the jewel. And once we deal with these 14 points, the 13 points, the League of Nations, will be an assembly of the nations of Europe. And when there's a problem, when there's a conflict, rather than fighting, we'll sit down and we'll negotiate our differences. And that will prevent war. 13 points, and number 14, the League of Nations. That was the jewel for Wilson. And sitting down with his advisors to put this together. And he sailed to Europe with this, I would like to think, in his breast pocket, ready to go. And that became the format for discussion at Versailles. And David Lloyd George of Great Britain and Georges Clemenceau of France wanted no part of these 13 points. They wanted to make sure that Germany was punished. In fact, when the German delegation arrived, they were told, there's no chair for you. You will be told what to sign. Called the Diktat of Versailles. We have no chair. We have no voice. We were not defeated. This is Hitler. We were not defeated. We withdrew. We withdrew behind our offices. We were not defeated. We signed a ceasefire. And he was right about that. This is a ceasefire. And then we'll negotiate. So when the German delegates arrived, there's no chair for them. And they're told, you were defeated. There's no ceasefire here. And they said, we were not defeated. They went home. And then another delegation showed up. And they said, we were not defeated. We're going to negotiate this. And then another delegation arrived. And they were told, if you don't sign, then we will invade you again. By this time, the German army had taken off their uniforms and had gone home. I mean, it's in All Quiet on the Western Front. I'm just remembering something from that book. I want to share it with you. When the war came, the teachers encouraged the young boys to enlist. And as he writes, we trusted our teachers. They were older than us. They knew better. We trust them. And it said, you must fight for Germany. Fight for every brick. And we trusted them because they were older than us. They were more experienced than us. And we trusted them. And this is what happened. There is no seat for you. You will be given the diktat of Versailles. And they were told, you have to stay in this hotel, which is surrounded by barbed wire, Allied troops, and you will be invited in to sign. And Wilson, struggling with this, and not well. He wasn't well, migraine. He was sick. But he said, I'm going to attend every conference, and I'm going to read the history of every nation. So I know as much about Russia as any other, as England or France does. And the Germans approached him. And they said, this is a dictated treaty. The only option we have is to sign it, or they're going to invade us again. And we have no army now. And Wilson, I understand what you're saying. Sign it. Sign it. And what we will do, and I will be part of this, what we will do when the anger subsides and people begin to realize this must be the war to end all wars, we'll go back to Versailles and we'll reopen the conversation and make an acceptable treaty to all parties. So Wilson knows all of this. Wilson's an intelligent guy. He knows all of this, and we have to stop it. And these two, Clemenceau and David Lloyd George, want to punish the Germans and make sure they never wage war again. So we're gonna make sure they never have an army again. I'm going to get into this to make sure they never have a navy again. And the U-boats will be cut up and used for razor blades, if you will. And Wilson telling the Germans, look, I've done everything I can. This is beyond my powers of persuasion. Sign it. Sign it. And a year or two or three after I'm reelected, and he was reelected in 1916, by the way, on the slogan, he kept us out of war. That's in 1916. The following year, we're in war. Lafayette, nous voici. Sign it. It's the best I can do. We'll discuss it in 2 or 3 years when things calm down. And we'll get your territory back. The Germans lost a great deal of territory. The equivalent for the United States would be California, Oregon, and Washington. That would be the equivalent of the United States, being stripped of land. I don't want to get into this, but this is what Wilson is up against. And he's frustrated, and he's sick. He's sick. And now he's got migraine headaches. And he's up all night reading these logs, reading these books, and said, we need a League of Nations. So he brings the treaty back, or membership in the League of Nations. And he's excited what I've accomplished here. Now, he tended to forget, maybe that's too strong, he overlooked the fact that the United States cannot commit, an American president cannot commit the United States to a treaty. It needs the okay of the Senate. The American president cannot bring the United States into war without the consent of the Congress. Now, he overlooked the fact that this is so great that I will bring this treaty to the Senate, which has to approve it, the senior member of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations to approve it. And he hand-delivered it. No president had hand-delivered this before. I'm going to hand-deliver it to the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And that man lived not too far from here, Henry Cabot Lodge. Lodge hated Wilson. Wilson hated Lodge. It was personal. Like Wilson, Lodge had a PhD in government. Like Wilson, Lodge had a great influence on policy, and he loathed Wilson, that Wilson was a know-it-all. I hate that. That's Wilson. So Wilson shows up with the treaty in hand. Had never happened before. Here it is. Sign it. Pass it along to the full Senate. And Lodge said, with all due respect, Mr. President, I and my committee have to read it over. No, you don't. No, you don't. Just sign it. My job, see, Lodge gets a lot of grief in the historically. My job is to read it, not just to pass on it. And I can just picture Wilson taking it and just throwing it on the desk. Read it and get back to me quickly. Everything hangs in a balance. Just read it. Damn you. He never said that. He was too much of a gentleman. And Lodge read it, and his committee read it. And they got back to Wilson on it. And I said, we agree with much of this. Good thinking, good work, good effort. A+. However, when everybody says however or but, there's trouble coming, right? That said, however, but We agree with the whole spirit of this. However, there's one part that we are concerned with. And that part is you have a League of Nations that will meet in Geneva, and all the nations of the world, we hope, will join the League of Nations. However, they have the authority to, I want to make sure we've got this, they have the authority to commit American troops to a combat situation. And we don't agree with that. The British, as they always did, were having trouble with the Irish again and again and again. You know, you whack the Irish, they never stay down. They keep getting up again to get whacked again. We have no interest in maintaining British colonial rule in Ireland. In fact, as Lodge said, do you know how many Irishmen in the Boston area vote for me? And I'm going to accept this? And he's making sense to me. We have no need to get involved in Britain's colonial wars in Ireland. Now, if they want to go to war, that's their business. And the French, we have no interest in the French maintaining control in Africa or parts of Africa, or certainly in the Mediterranean. That's their fight, not our fight. The League of Nations is not going to commit American troops. These are men who are faceless. We don't know them, that will commit the blood and treasure of America. No, no, no. Change the language. And Wilson, absolutely no. I am not going to change the language. And the way these concerns were expressed in the press were that we have, I haven't mentioned this word before, we have reservations about this treaty. That's their word. We have reservations. Yeah, but. Good, good, good. Whoop. We have reservations, and these are the reservations. This was the reservation. Wilson said this is unacceptable. Unacceptable. And I'm standing for re-election in 1920. Now, no president had ever, had ever served a third term. I'm standing for re-election in 1920. And I'm going to tour the country. And the only topic will be American entry into the League of Nations, to make sure your son does not die in another trench warfare. I'm going to the country. And his wife, his physician, you can't do this. You're too sick. You'll die out there. And he said, if my death brings about American entry into the League of Nations, it's a death well delivered to the world. That's him. If I die out there, it's a good death, you know, to make sure this is the last great war. Wilson kind of lost a sense of reality here. Third term. And he traveled the country by rail. No air conditioning. Every place there was a number of people waiting to hear the president. Stop the train. I'm getting out to speak to them. This is why we must do this. And way out in Colorado, Pueblo, Colorado, he crashed, speaking, and he was done. He had a massive stroke. He was done. And he was rushed back to Washington for help. And he didn't die on the way back. And he went into his bed, and he recovered a little bit. And there's photography, and Edith Wilson, his wife, was part of this, that he was paralyzed on his left side. You know, he was just paralyzed by the stroke. He had a massive stroke. And he refused to resign. His vice president refused to step in and ask him to resign. And his wife said he won't resign. He's absolutely wild about this. You know, and what she would do to fake out or to mislead the country is that he would be sitting in his chair in a three-piece suit, you know, working on paperwork. So he's paralyzed on his left side. So he's doing paperwork on his right side. And what she would do to cover for him is that she would stand on his left side to cover the fact that he was paralyzed and help him make sure that he was working on the right side and just using her body as a shield. And this is the right thing to do, for my husband, who's paralyzed now and can barely speak, but I can decipher what he's saying. And of course the word was he's fine. And then the members of the Senate would come and say, we need to see the president about this or that. Didn't matter. And she said, just give me the paper and I'll give it to the president. And they would say, we need to see him. And she said, I will give the paperwork to him. And in her mind, she's thinking, I want to get him home alive. I don't want him to die in this bed. So I'm going to cover for him. Good, huh? I'm going to cover for my guy. So I'm going to lean over. He's working on his right side. He's got his glasses on, signing papers, who knew what. And if you look at the signatures on the papers, and historians have done this, the signatures are in her handwriting, not in his. And people who wanted to get in to see him said, I want him home alive. Give me the papers. That brings us to 1923. Wilson left the White House, and he died in bed in 1923. The war to end all wars. And I hope that this will, give you some impetus to read, a little bit about Wilson, and not about the progressive period as well, but about Wilson, and the war, and the battles he had verbally, with the Italians. Well, the Italian representative, Vittorio, went home. I got nothing out of this. Orlando Vittoria, I want the land along the Dalmatian coast, as part of reparations. And when they gave him nothing, I'm sure there's an Italian word I'm not going to use for this, he pushed his chair back and said, I'm going home. He never got what he wanted, and that led Mussolini in as well. So when the Germans came home and were told that we've been defeated, when we signed when we signed a ceasefire, that was part of the opening for the Nazis. And, that we have been cheated at the conference table. And so we can do a whole course on the rise of the Nazis. And that word has surfaced again in the press, hasn't it? With regard to what's going on. Boy, that's a trigger, isn't it? And so Wilson is home. His golf game is gone. The Masters will be on, won't they? They're on. And I'm not a golfer. I cheat. I cheat at miniature golf. Only way to win. I'll keep the scorecard, and I'll change the numbers. I always did. Even when I was courting, I'll keep the scorecard. Even today, I do it. I beat you. You lost by 3 strokes. Do you remember in school when we had to pledge allegiance? And do you remember that? And then, with Hitler and Mussolini, it went to this. Remember that? Yes. And then it became nothing. But it was this to hands in your pocket. And when a teacher walked into the room, everybody stood, didn't they? When a teacher walked into the room, everybody stood. And she or he would say, all right, boys and girls, thank you. That never happens, does it? It should.